In 1975, it was just sightings, and it was, you could only have one sighting. You could not be a contactee. You could not talk about beings talking to you and stuff like that. They would lock you up. Yeah. And now it's like you can talk about it. People might go, well, I don't know if the guy's really for real, but people understand that people are telling these stories, and so it's a matter of time till you get in the field where people start to accept this. And I say we're no different than any other social or political movement. Just because we think our thing is important doesn't mean that the skeptics have to jump on board and everybody's got to throw their hands up and everybody changes their life or whatever. If I had the experiences I had, I would be probably exactly where they are. And so we have to sort of calm down, put this stuff out, and realize that more and more people, especially since 2012, Colin Andrews was talking about consciousness in the lecture that I saw. And then I went to consciousness, then Paula came on board, and even have people like Richard Dolan have started talking about it. Now Richard, I don't know if he's talking about the word, but I don't know if he really understands the in-depth concept behind it. But you see more and more people talking about consciousness, same in quantum physics. Right. It used to be like death if you talked about consciousness. You couldn't use the word. And now that's the big thing in quantum physics is what's the nature of consciousness. So I see that we're moving down that road, whether we're getting help from above or whatever, but I think we're at a point now where it's just a matter of time until almost like the UFO with the Nimitz thing, where it goes in the New York Times and everybody goes, I knew that already, like it didn't bother anybody. It's like they accepted it. And that's what happens. So in any social political movement, so I say we're like the gays of the 1960s, that more and more people are coming out of the closet, and the more come out, and then it's like suddenly they say we're going to have gay marriage, and everybody goes, what the heck? Who cares, And it does, but you couldn't have done that in the 50s. So it's this, and I think all ideas work that way, that they gravitate up, and people it goes more and more into the media, more and more subliminally. People are watching UFO stuff, and I don't really believe that stuff, but they're watching it as entertainment, and the subliminal thing comes, and the consciousness continues to rise, and it gets to the point where it flips, where somebody says something, and everybody just accepts it as truth. You get to a point where the field gets to a certain point, and it suddenly makes sense to people. Oh, now I know what it is, and we move to the next step. So once you get consciousness, there's going to be a higher level and a higher level, and it just keeps going. There's never going to be a position where it ends, where we know all the answers. So it's just a process of doing what you have to do at your level, move the ball down the field for the next group, and it just goes, because what we know about the universe is probably like 1/1,000,000th of 1% of whatever, and we think we know we're going to get all the answers. You're not. You're just here to move the ball down the field for other people and get out of it what you can, an understanding of how it fits into your life and why you're here. Because one of the problems we've always had in the UFO community is there was a joke told at one conference. The woman came up and said to the conference guy, do you have a senior discount? And he said, if I had a senior discount, everybody would get in for a discount. So there was very few young people. So when these young guys came along, and they all work on Twitter, and they're all interacting with each other, so I would give one, and I would know instantly all the guys had the document. And so when these documents leaked out, they got a hold of it. And that's the kind of thing we need, is independence, where you get the material, you put it out, and you go as fast as you can to get this material and gather it and go in the cracks and figure out how all this stuff works, and not have the biases of having some sort of spin to it or whatever. So I really appreciated these guys, and I called them the sort of the young guns, the future of ufology.
Greetings and welcome to the Vortex. I'm your host, Daniel Allen Jones, and I'm very honored to be here with Grant Cameron.
Daniel, thank you. Thanks for your interest in having a little talk with me.
Well, it's great to be able to have you here. There's so much that you've covered when it comes to UFOs and understanding how consciousness plays a role in many of these different mysterious aspects of our reality. And we're trying to understand how we can navigate through all of these different ways, and in a sense that gives us some clarity about what we're dealing with. And while you focused on several different things, we'll kind of go through and take us back how it really came about for you, and looking into the government's files and the Canadian files of UFO studies and things like this, and then how that kind of turned into a broader spectrum of ESP studies and psychic phenomenon. So what was that like?
Yeah, well, it was a pretty clear story. I wasn't interested in UFOs. I was interested in death, around stuff with death. So I had done a paper at the university on weird things that happen around death. So I'd go to the chaplains in the hospitals and I'd ask, has anybody ever predict their death? Anybody ever have someone come to visit them, near-death experiences? This is in the 70s. And so I really wasn't interested in UFOs. There was a small town just north of the North Dakota border in Canada where a small town was getting inundated with UFO sightings. And so I said to my friend, I said, well, let's go see what they're looking at. And he said, okay, we'll go. And we didn't go. We didn't go for 3 months. And then a local TV studio got this thing jumping off the ground. And then when this thing went viral in the city I'm living in, I go, well, let's go see what they're looking at. So we went out there and we're looking around and what are they looking at? And we didn't really realize. My friend said, let's drive into town one more time. If we don't see anything, we'll go home. I said, fantastic. This has been a total waste of time. We turned the car to go, and it appeared from the left to the right. Nobody said, is that what they're looking at? Everybody just said, there it is. And we instantly knew. And I just sort of, like my friends went on with their life, and I took piles of people out there to see this thing. And I just fell off the edge of the earth. I mean, I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was going like, wow, man, this is, because you hear about paranormal experiences, but when it happens to you, and I hadn't had any paranormal experiences before. So I was sort of blown away by this thing, and I was really eager to document this thing, and I documented all the sightings and talked to the people in the town, and I tried to publish it, and people could care less. I mean, the publishers didn't really want to do anything. The local publisher said, Mr. Cameron, you may believe in this kind of stuff, count me among the unbelievers. And I went, what? I couldn't believe it. So all I was interested at that point was I'd seen this thing, and I wanted to know, somebody's got to know what that thing is. I don't really understand, but somebody's got to know. So I started this search. So I go to the Canadian government, their program they ran in the 1950s. I recovered all the files from the guy who was doing it, his private files, and all the Canadian government documents, and that led to Dr. Eric Walker at Penn State University, who has all these, accolades of, inventions and, doctorate degrees and stuff. And he knew what was going on, and we sort of chased him around for a number of years. And I sort of learned a little bit that it was real, and learned a bit from the Canadian, from Walker. But at one point he said, well, he was talking in one of his papers that he was going to leave some of his papers at the Truman Library. So I'd gone to Penn State and I looked at all his papers. I couldn't find anything. We're looking for the UFO file. Couldn't find it. So I went to the Truman Library, and there were really not that many files on him. And so that's when I said, oh, the president's got to know what's going on here. He's the most powerful guy in the world. So I asked him, I said, so what do you got on UFOs? And they basically said, we've got all these telegrams in 1952 when the UFOs overflew the White House. Right. And they said, we got all these telegrams that people were sending, don't shoot down the UFOs. So, and I said, that's it? And they go, that's it. So I photocopied all those things. And it was about 2 hours down the road from the Eisenhower Library, so I said, well, I'll go to the Eisenhower Library and I'll see what they got. And then I remember they have to do an interview, and they come and they ask all these questions in order to be able to research there. And they said, what are you looking at? And I said, well, UFOs. And they had done a pre-search, and they found 5 documents. And then I said, so how many pages you got here? And he said, 28 million pages. And I went, 5 documents, 28 million pages. And it sort of puzzled me. So then I got on this sort of a wheel, which didn't go anywhere, where I go from presidential library to presidential library. And in every one, I'd go for 5 days, and within the first 2 hours, I'd finished. There was nothing there. And so I got sort of frustrated, and then I came across the former head scientist for the CIA, who's still active, and he started indicating about portals and this sort of thing. And so I sort of chased him around, followed him around. I got to talk to Dick Cheney on the air. I confronted him with the famous question, in all your jobs in government, have you ever been briefed on the subject of UFOs? Because that's the whole thing, is the briefing is the truth. I don't care what you think about them. I don't care if you saw a UFO. Did someone walk in your office and brief you, swear you to secrecy, and tell you what's going on? And what did you learn? And he basically said, if I'd been briefed on that subject, it would probably be classified. So I was spun. So from 1975 all the way to 2012, that's what I was doing. And I was kind of famous for recovering the Rockefeller Initiative documents out of the Clinton White House and stuff. But it was sort of like you weren't really getting anywhere. And then at this interview, it's a lecture given by Colin Andrews in February 26, 2012 in Phoenix, Arizona. I know I was actually here. It was in Laughlin. Colin Andrews is lecturing, and like the UFO thing, I wasn't really interested in crop circles, and there was all these lectures going on all day, so you don't go to all the lectures. And I said, well, I should go. He's a pretty prominent UFO researcher, and there was this big controversy that he had said 80% are hoaxed and 20% are real. And he had really taken a lot of flack for this. So I said, I wonder how he's handling this. So this is his first lecture for many years. So I went in there, and it was the situation where I sort of zone out. I don't want to be in the lecture. I'm not really thinking about it. I'm just sort of thinking about other things. And this is where I started to develop this theory, where you shut down the ego mind, the little chatter in your brain, and I'm sort of daydreaming, and I'm sitting there, and my mind goes quiet, and suddenly 3 pieces of a puzzle get put together. So it's things that I had studied before. It wasn't anything new, but it was almost like, if you know the invention of the hologram or the laser, they did the same thing. They worked on all these programs, they couldn't figure it out, and then they go sit on a park bench and they're, watching some guy play tennis, or they're sitting on a park bench, and all of a sudden it just comes to them. It puts it together in your head, all the pieces, and you go, oh, that's how it works. And you go running back to the lab. That's what happened to me. So I put these 3 pieces, and the 3 had to do with the mental phenomena. So one was the Canadian government document, because I'd gone after the Canadian. I had the files. I knew that there was this top secret memo that said flying saucers exist. It's the most highly classified subject in the United States. Vannevar Bush is running it. It's of tremendous significance. But what popped into my head during that daydream thing, instantaneously with the 2 other things, was we were also told by American officials that other things might be associated with flying saucers, such as mental phenomena. And I went, oh, mental phenomena.
Yeah.
And then Dr. Eric Walker, we'd been bugging him, and at one point he cuts us off and says, let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? And the guy didn't have an answer. And so he said, look, unless you understand about ESP and how it works, you will not be taken in. So that happened in 1990. The download experience happened in 2012. I never knew what Walker was talking about. I couldn't figure out what it was. But when that thing happened, it was like, oh, that's what Walker was talking about. It fit with the mental phenomena. And then Jan Hartson, 2 years later, in 1992 or 93, had gone to a lecture by Ben Rich at Lockheed Skunk Works, which is rumored to be the place where they back engineer the flying saucers. And he said to Ben, I had this experience at 9 years old. I'm fascinated with UFOs. I want to know how they get here. How does the propulsion system work? And Ben says, let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? Exactly what Walker had said.
Yeah.
So these 3 things came together, and when they came together, it was like, oh, that's how it works. And as I said, I walked around in a daze for 2 days. I couldn't believe it. It's like, it came with absolute certainty. It's like, this is how it works. It's consciousness. And then as I went on there, then I started running into people who'd flown the ship. They sort of synchronistically linked up with me, and I started to realize it is all consciousness. And so I started that thing, and then all the pieces started to fit together. And then in 2016, I had another noetic experience that was much more complex about how does the universe actually work, with things like, is it made out of nuts and bolts, the universe? If it is, that's one world. But if it's made out of consciousness, that's a different world. Is it one life, or is it multiple lives? Is it random, or is it pattern? Is it separate? Is everything separate, or is everything together? And it was these things, one after another. And I'm sitting on a street writing these things down. And so that was been since 2012. That's all I've really done. And I've come to write a book on music, which talks about how musicians get their stuff. I've done one on downloads in terms of inventions, Nobel Prizes, again, music, art, books, and stuff like that. And I realized it was just sort of backing up what had happened in 2012 was this idea that we've made a wrong assumption about the universe, that it's made out of consciousness, which creates matter, and if you get that straight and you realize everything's connected, everything's one, then all the pieces start to fit together. And I'm even at a point now where I really think I know what's going on. I'm not, because what happened in 75, when I saw that object, and nobody would pay any attention to this manuscript I'd done, which didn't get published until a couple of years ago, all I was interested in is who knows what that thing is. So I had this burning question. I had to find out what that is. And when these things happened, I just sort of said, okay, I think I know what's going on now. I know how it all fits together. And now I just sort of gather stories. So if somebody has a musician that had the download and a song, I just gather that, and I do this latest thing, this obsession. It's sort of like the phenomena, whatever it is, keeps dragging me into these things where synchronistic things happen. And my latest thing is apports, which I didn't know what it was until a year ago, where suddenly someone tells me about these apport things that are falling out of the ceiling of experiencers and psychics and stuff like that. And I went, really? And then I do a Google search and find out there's a collection of apports at the university where I worked for 37 years. And I'm going, really? There's only 2 collections in the world, and one's at my university. And I go, I got to follow this thing. And so now I just sort of gather these stories about people with coins falling, stuff falling out of the ceiling, Uri Geller.
These are different than manifestations per se.
Yeah, well, the way I would define it, and I still use the wrong terminology. So a manifestation is something that comes out of the field. So it's not something that was in the world. It's sort of like a polished stone or something that drops down. And so that'd be a manifestation, and a port is something that moves around, like the Skinwalker Ranch was all of ports. People talk about UFOs. There were no UFOs, according to Jacques Vallée. He said that was the only thing we didn't have at Skinwalker Ranch was UFOs.
Right.
It was all this other stuff. And they would say, so somebody would give it a name. So one of the download things I got in 2016 was this thing, is it a noun or is it a verb? And it's a verb. It's all one thing. It's just active and it's alive and it's getting more complex all the time. But people wanted to change it into a noun because the rational analytical mind wants to put words on it and to make it make sense of it. So they would say, "Oh, that's just poltergeist phenomena," and then I would say, "So who's he?" I mean, you put a name on it, doesn't make it go away. Just because you put a name, and that's what they do, is you put a name on it, and then we don't have to talk about it anymore. So they would say it's poltergeist phenomena, but to me, it's like, no, it's you got to understand how this thing is working, that it's part of this field, and it's a big part of the UFO phenomena, and I'm probably maybe the only person that's working on it. And I remember Stanley Krippner, who had sent this collection to the University of Manitoba. He had a bunch of these reports stolen, and when I did this Google search, I found an interview where he's talking about these reports, and that's when he said, I sent it to the University of Manitoba, and I went, what? And so when I talked to Krippner, and he said, well, it's about time somebody did a book on reports. So nobody's really looked at this phenomena, but again, like my UFO sighting, like my download experience, it was not something I chose to do. It was sort of like something happened, and it was like, or the music book, where I get a phone call with the music book, and the guy says, I got a message from, and this is Chris Bledsoe, this famous experiencer, and he's dealing with these guardians, and I'd had a very dramatic experience with him, so I knew he was the real deal. And he phones me up and he says, I got a message from the guardians. And I said, you do? He said, yeah, they got a message for you. I go, really? So what's the message? And he said, they want you to know the messages in the music. And I went, well, you may be talking to the wrong guy. I don't listen to music. I don't play music. I'm not interested in music. And he just kept talking. And he said, well, one song you should listen to is Kashmir by Led Zeppelin. It's like, whatever. He just kept talking. And then he said, the other song I think you should listen to is After the Gold Rush by Neil Young. And this is the hook. This is how they drag you, almost like the Stanley Krippner, the reports at the University of Manitoba. He said, Neil Young. And I said, Neil Young is part of this thing? And he goes, yeah. And I said, he grew up in my city. Like, I come from a city where nobody goes. It's like the coldest major city in the world. The Canadians don't even want to go there. But Neil Young grew up there. And I'm thinking, Neil Young? And that's what got me into checking it. And once I saw it, then I saw this weird relationship between musicians, messages, and the UFO phenomena. And so that's my whole career, is just being dragged down one rabbit hole after another. And now I just basically tell these weird stories. And I love the report stories because they're so weird,
right,
of things that happen to people. And, in terms of, I can sort of explain my idea of how the universe works. But in terms of seeking the answer, I really don't seek the answer anymore. I think I understand basically what's really going on here, and I just love the weird stories. So that's basically what I do now, is tell stories.
Yeah, that's incredible. And being a musician myself, it never occurred to me for the longest time that the connections that are made through these sort of downloads that people describe receiving, and then all of a sudden if they can remember it and have that recollection and then express it in whatever form, it can end up being a huge hit or change.
And it usually is a big hit. I mean, I can give you lots of examples. Like yesterday that's what sort of, when I started looking at the music thing, I put the download in music, and that's when I got Paul McCartney. And one of the most produced songs of the 20th century was Yesterday. And he got it in a dream in the middle of the night, and he gets up and he quickly records this thing, and then he runs around for weeks saying, you ever heard this song before? And they go, no, I haven't heard that song. So that's a major song. The song Let It Be came in a dream, and then I even have the one like Coldplay, and people kept saying, Coldplay, they've got a UFO connection. And I go, I couldn't find it or whatever. And then I'm searching Martin or whatever the lead guy's name is or whatever. He tells one song that's like 700 million hits on the internet. And I don't remember the name of the song, but he said it's 3 o'clock in the morning. I can't sleep. Like a lot of musicians, they can't sleep, and they're taking sleeping pills and stuff like that. And he's up in the middle of the night, and the lyric and the riff comes to him, and he goes, oh, that's pretty cool. Now I can go to bed. And then they wouldn't let him go to bed until he recorded it.
Oh, of course.
And that's that whole thing. So then I realized, like, it's the same process, and I realized that it's happening in music, in art, in books, and even do the 13 Nobel Prizes. So then I write this book called Inspired, where I basically go through all these different things and say, you think people invented this with the rational analytical mind? No, they actually got it in a dream. And so I put these sort of things, and that's where I got the idea that I was expressing today in this panel, And they're talking about remote viewing, and I said, no, it's all the same thing. There's a field, and whether you use you're a musician and you're right-brained and you can tap into the field, or whether you're doing remote viewing, or whether you're a psychic, or you had a head injury, or you're autistic, or whatever, somehow this forces you to dissociate. You get in the field and you pull the stuff out of the field, and my belief is that the stuff in the field is the real information, because that's what it came to me. When the 2 downloads I had came with absolute certainty. It's like, this is the way it works, and it has turned out to be valid in terms of what I got. It turned out to be exactly the way it appears to be, and that's where I think the important thing that people have to learn is that everything is consciousness. And the only reason that a psychic or a musician or whoever can get that material is they're able to shut the noise off. And the noise is the left brain that's talking and keeps you in the physical world. And when you can shut that down through meditation, through psychedelics, through whatever process you're using, you pop into the field, you get the material, and you bring it back, and then you got to quickly write it down, like in dreams. So you got to write it down immediately. That was my download, and luckily this big 24-piece download that I got, I was writing it down, because I never would have remembered it. And it's like a dream. It just sort of fades away. Or I point out that 40% of all experiencers, according to the FREE survey, the Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Experiences, their whole thing was, they said 40% of all experiencers at one point knew the answer to everything in the universe. And so you realize that the beings, whoever they are, have access to that field, and they take you into the field, and then they go back, and it's like a dream. So I'll talk to people, how long did you know everything in the universe? And they'll say, basically by the end of the first day, it was like a dream. It faded, and by the end of the first day, all I could remember was that at one point I knew the answer to everything in the universe. So to me, it's all the pieces fit together, everything that comes along. People tell me stories, and I can almost tell them, okay, this is what's going to happen next. Or people like, for example, the apport thing, when they describe it, and it's heated up, it's hot when the apport comes, it falls out of the sky, like these metal pieces, or stuff like that. Or people who fly the ship, and they basically will tell you the same thing. They all sit there, you put your hand on a panel, you put your hand on a ball, you become one with the craft is alive, whatever you think is what the craft does. And so I'll say, stop. How do you fly a flying saucer? Because I got 50 people who have told me, and 14% of people apparently have. It's like they're reading off a cue card. He's going to say this next, and he's going to say this, and he's going to say this. It's the same thing. And nobody says anything different. And even you go back, looking back into history, you get things like, now what's his name? From the 1970s, he became Muslim, Cat Stevens. So Cat Stevens, before he became Muslim, talked about the fact that he was taken off a rooftop in London and he was abducted. He wrote 2 songs. One was called Longer Boats, one was called Freezing Steel. And the Freezing Steel one says, I was on the ship of freezing steel, the ship without the guiding wheel. There is no wheel. And so you actually get verification going back into history when you see these songs that he probably didn't even know what he was talking about or where it came from.
Yeah.
But it verifies this whole thing that people are talking. And I think the stuff's coming to the field. Like if you were at the panel we had today, people are saying, well, what's the future going to be? And I say, it's going to be a thing where you put all the material in the field, people hear all the stuff, and then it's like the New York Times article when they suddenly do the Nimitz thing. There's so much UFO stuff in the field, everybody thinks, well, there's going to be disclosure, everybody's going to jump off a bridge, the stock market's going to melt down. And then when the New York Times article comes out, everybody goes, yeah, I knew that already. It doesn't affect anybody. And so that's what I think we have to do, is put as much information you can into the field, so that everybody, even though they don't believe it, they hear it. And then when somebody comes with something to verify it, everybody just accepts it. So there is no day when all the skeptics are going to suddenly throw their hands up and say it's for real. It's a gradual process, almost like science, ufology. It all advances one funeral at a time. And so that's the way I look at it. If you've got eternity, it's not so much that we need an answer, because in America we want everything yesterday. We want, something new or whatever. We've got eternity to figure it out, and it's all about you doing something with what you've got.
Right.
How are you? What's your role in this whole thing? And it really doesn't matter whether something good or bad happens to you. It's how are you going to deal with what happens to you. And people are sort of like, they sort of figure like this separation thing. Is it separate or is it one? If it's all one, then it really doesn't matter. It's all experience, and it's what you're doing. Whereas people believe it's separation. It's Hillary Clinton's emails got me. I didn't do anything because of that, or Donald Trump, or my mother-in-law, got me upset, or the dog ate my homework and stuff. And in the end, I think when you die, when my understanding is that you only get asked one question: how did it work out? Because you planned it, and you can't bring up all these outside factors. It's about you. It's got nothing to do with them because they didn't believe or because they did whatever. It's got to do with you. It's got nothing to do with anybody else. All you can do is control your own destiny and determine, what did I come into the world to do? I'm going to get asked how did it work out when I leave, and so what am I supposed to do, and am I doing it? And that's all you have to worry about. You don't worry about whether it's catching on with anybody else or we got to convert people. And so to me, it's pretty simple as to how it's sort of worked out, and I feel very content with my understanding, and I may be wrong, but my understanding of the world, and have gone to this thing where I just sort of look for weird stories and stuff to sort of entertain people with this thing, and that may be what it is. So if you entertain people, it's non-threatening, where they hear these stories, and you hear enough of port stories, and then they're thinking about it, and they're thinking, well, what is that, and you just inundate the field with information.
Well, I think it's really important to see how the direction this is all going in. A lot of times, even now, is still so stratified. You have people looking just at the UFOs like they're physical sightings and not taking into consideration the other anomalous aspects of ESP or consciousness, things like that. So, and I'd like to also tie this in to something else that you've also brought up in recent times, is that we've got a lot of new people coming into these fields. We've got people who are interested in not just the sightings, but the stories, but also the psychic phenomenon, and a lot of these different areas that are very mysterious. And we need to see that there is a lot of correlation that can be made between many of these different aspects. But when we have people coming in that aren't as familiar with maybe some of the cases, but they'd like to know about how this is all connected, what would you say is something that we should do? And you've also talked about the young guns out there and who are just getting involved, whether they're young or old. This is something that they're brand new to a lot of the time. They're not familiar with some of the material that's been out for decades. What would you say to those who are interested in all this and wanting to understand how some of these things are connected beyond just the physical sightings of a UFO in the sky, and what it might mean for us and where we're going in the future of science?
Yeah, see, I think people are sort of hung up with and because we're an entertainment type society, a lot of people who come in, they just want to hear the stories. And I always say, so sightings. So you see a sighting, and it's the Nimitz video, it's been played a million times. Everybody's, what's the latest thing on the Nimitz? And it's like Jacques Vallée said, the Nimitz sighting was a sighting 15 years ago. It's time to get over it.
Right.
But people are into that kind of thing where they sort of want the entertainment value. And what I'm trying to do is move them to the fact that there's something behind this. So even if we say, okay, those videos show something anomalous is happening, that's all it proves. I mean, it just says something anomalous, or people want disclosure. That's a big thing. So what? If the government knows or the government doesn't know, it really doesn't change anything. It really has nothing to do with you and I. And it's the bigger aspect that when I saw it, I had the advantage that I didn't have to go through. People are going through this cycle of trying to prove it to themselves. Like my friends and relatives are making me a bad time about it. So they're trying to prove UFOs exist. I had the advantage that I knew because it was pretty close to me. And so I never went down that road of trying to prove it. And I always went to the next step of, okay, who are they? Why are they here? And I think the people get new people, even old people. I tried to convince people who've been in it for years. Like, I mean, how many times are you going to run this cycle again of, like, even the metals? So the big thing now is the metals. Oh, we got to have these metals, and it's going to be anomalous. And so what? So the isotopes are all messed up or whatever. It's anomalous. Jacques Vallée will say, well, it could have been, or Kit Green will say, oh, it could have been made in a black lab. You're never going to solve that problem, even if you say, okay, it's anomalous. So what? It's like a UFO photograph or whatever. All it says is, yeah, UFOs exist.
Right. But
people are sort of stuck in that thing of trying to prove UFOs exist. And I guess you need an experience where it's undeniable that it's there in order for you to move to the next step to say, well, what is it? And that's why I always try to move people away from that kind of stuff of the metals and the UFO photographs and the government disclosure to the idea of talking to experiencers who are actually interacting with the phenomena or the intelligence behind the phenomena. And a lot of the UFO community is stuck in this cycle that they say, well, that's just anecdotal stories. These people believe they're on the ship or they believe they're getting messages or whatever. I say, well, it's all anecdotal. You believe you're a skeptic. You believe you saw a UFO. Right. It's all belief systems.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where we're falling down in the UFO community is that we're ignoring these people. And I say, especially if you consider 40% of people say they knew the answer to everything in the universe. 42%, and I had the one woman, I tell the story, the one woman gives me her cell phone in California. She said, look at this. And so the 42% say they got mathematical, technical, or scientific material in their head they didn't learn in school. A woman comes up, shows me her cell phone, and I gave this lecture on downloads. And I said, oh, you got that as a download? And she said, yeah, it's 25 pages. I'm scrolling on her phone. I'm watching this thing. I said, that's pretty cool. And it's got all these mathematical formulas and stuff. And I said, yeah, you got that in downloads? She says, yeah, I'm a secretary. I've never taken science. And I go, wow.
Oh, yeah.
And it's that kind of thing where I think the UFO community is doing a disservice to itself by not talking to those people. So you can give them a lie detector, whatever you got to do to test it. But when 40% of people say they have the answer to the universe, it's like what I give the analogy, because I used to run buildings at the university. So you walk down a hall that says Physics 101, Chemistry 101, Physics 101, and this door says everything in the universe. And you go to get in the door, and the door's locked. Well, who in their right mind would not try to pick the lock? I mean,
right.
Why would you not try to hack that thing?
Yeah.
And because if you're going to make up a story about being on a ship, the one thing you don't put in your story is I knew the answer to everything in the universe. This is just kills your story.
Yeah.
So it's not something somebody's going to make up, or that I flew the flying saucer. And those are the things I think we got to go to. And maybe it's just a matter of time, because as I mentioned in this latest panel that we had, that people are saying, well, when's it going to happen? And I say, well, we're moving, because in 1975 it was just sightings, and it was, you could only have one sighting. You could not be a contactee. You could not talk about beings talking to you and stuff like that. They would lock you up.
Yeah.
And now it's like you can talk about it. People might go, well, I don't know if the guy's really for real, but people understand that people are telling these stories, and so it's a matter of time till you get in the field where people start to accept this. And I say we're no different than any other social or political movement. Just because we think our thing is important doesn't mean that the skeptics have to jump on board and everybody's got to throw their hands up and everybody changes their life or whatever. If I had the experiences I had, I would be probably exactly where they are. And so we have to sort of calm down, put this stuff out, and realize that more and more people, especially since 2012, Colin Andrews is talking about consciousness in the lecture that I saw. And then I went to consciousness, then Paula came on board, and even have people like Richard Dolan have started talking about it. Now, Richard, I don't know if he's talking about the word, but I don't know if he really understands the in-depth concept behind it. But you see more and more people talking about consciousness, same in quantum physics.
Right.
It used to be like death if you talked about consciousness. You couldn't use the word. And now that's the big thing in quantum physics, is what's the nature of consciousness. So I see that we're moving down that road, whether we're getting help from above or whatever, but I think we're at a point now where it's just a matter of time until, almost like the UFO with the Nimitz thing, where it goes in the New York Times and everybody goes, I knew that already. Like, it didn't bother anybody. It's like they accepted it. And that's what happens. So in any social political movement, so I say we're like the gays of the 1960s, that more and more people are coming out of the closet, and the more come out, and then it's like suddenly they say we're going to have gay marriage, and everybody goes, what the heck? Who cares, And it does, but you couldn't have done that in the 50s. So it's this, and I think all ideas work that way, that they gravitate up, and people it goes more and more into the media, more and more subliminally. People are watching UFO stuff, and I don't really believe that stuff, but they're watching it as entertainment, and the subliminal thing comes, and the consciousness continues to rise, and it gets to the point where it flips, where somebody says something, and everybody just accepts it as truth.
Yeah. So it's something that I think is needed more now than ever, is the integrity of looking at these things in a way that we're not discluding them strictly because of bias, or the idea that it doesn't seem like it should fit in because we don't want it to, or sometimes we like things to be more exotic, and so we overdo it and try to make it more than it should. And so it's good to see that you've come across in a way that connects many of these things together in a way that it's not just about being analytical or logical, but you have to tie in the other intrinsic things that are instinctive and tie it all together in a way that's unified. And so, Grant, it's been amazing to see all the variety of things that you've done. So for people who are interested in following along with your work, where can they go to find out more?
Okay. The two places that I recommend, my website, if they want to get my books, they're on the website. There's links on the website. But usually I tell people, the one is Presidential UFO Facebook. So now I'm doing the Stanton Friedman. I get dragged every now and then back to the document stuff.
Right.
And I'm doing the Stanton Friedman, this massive, huge collection. And I photographed 6,000 pages of his material. So I'm putting those things on my Facebook as I go through them and read them and stuff. I put them on, and my Facebook is Presidential UFO, and I'll put, almost every day I'll put a document on there. It comes out of the Friedman files. And the other one is White House UFO YouTube channel. And that's where I do, like I'm doing a whole series of episodes on the Stanton Friedman files. So I'll go through the documents and I'll sort of read them 40 minutes or 25 minutes each, and all my new stuff. So anything I get new, where I'll interview a lot of experiencers, because I got a lot of experiencers come to me and they say, I've got this story, I want to tell you this story, and it's an incredibly complex story with reports and messages and all sorts of stuff. And they sort of are approaching me like, I want to tell the story to somebody, but they sort of have the idea that I'm going to grab their story and do a book about it or do an investigation. And I just have so much material that it's not that I'm not interested in their story, but I just haven't got time to do it. So then I'll bring them on and I'll say, come tell me your story. I've got 17,000 subscribers on YouTube. You can tell your story and it gets it off your chest, and somebody may learn something from your story. So it's the White House UFO YouTube channel and the Presidential UFO Facebook site where the vast majority of my stuff, and I post a lot of stuff that I put out there. Because to me, I've had this thing with, I've always been up, if you know what the Avery is, these high-level people who have been working on, they got security clearances and stuff, and I've been watching them for years, and they knew a lot of stuff. And I talked about these guys like 30 years ago, and now everybody's getting religious about Kit Green and Eric Davis and Hal Puthoff and stuff. Right. I was talking about these guys 30 years ago, and I was saying, watch these guys. These guys know something. But the problem was that they're either working on a patent or they're under an NDA, or they don't want to cut off their sources. They want to get more material, so they keep it all. And I said it was like a second control group. You had one control group in the government. Now you got these guys who are keeping it all to themselves for whatever reason. And I said, well, what's the point? I mean, 24 guys now know instead of 12 guys know. And I said, you've got to put it out. So with me, I basically take all the documents I've got, I take all the stuff I got, and I just put it out there. I don't really, I believe in this thing of flooding the field with the material. I don't hold anything back. I really get in a lot of trouble because they say, can't you keep your damn mouth shut, and stuff like that. I just put it out because I figure, what's the point?
Well, someone has to.
Yeah.
Eventually.
Yeah. Because people have these vested, and I don't need the money. I don't need the ego. I don't really lecture that much anymore. I just take the stuff and put it out and let you decide, believing that if you see enough material, you're going to come to the right conclusion. And that's what it comes down to, that if there's enough material, people will make the right decision. People aren't stupid. It's not that they want to be biased or whatever. They just suddenly, you get to a point where the field gets to a certain point and it suddenly makes sense to people. Oh, now I know what it is, and we move to the next step. So once you get consciousness, there's going to be a higher level and a higher level, and it just keeps going. There's never going to be a position where it ends, where we know all the answers. So it's just a process of doing what you have to do at your level, move the ball down the field for the next group, and it just goes, because what we know about the universe is probably like 1/1,000,000 of 1% of whatever, and we think we know we're going to get all the answers. You're not. You're just here to move the ball down the field for other people and get out of it what you can, an understanding of how it fits into your life and why you're here.
Yeah, and with that, I think it's important to see, as you've said before, I'd like to take a moment to give a shout out to the young guns who are really doing the work behind the scenes and are really doing some up and coming things, and not just with UFOs, but like you said, tying all this together. So what's something you could send out to all those out there?
Yeah, the young guns. I was actually the one that sort of gave them that name because I was impressed with these guys. Because number one, they found a girl. I mentioned her on my thing, Kay Randall May. And I had this audio tape that had been leaked to me by Kit Green, and she's talking to this woman, and they came up with this. They said, her name is Kay Randall May. And I go, how did you guys figure that out? But they're young people, and they don't have the biases, because a lot of times you get into the UFO thing and you get these biases. So they were doing this thing. They were getting the material. They were able to move around the internet, pull stuff that other people didn't know how to find. They could get into databases, and they knew how to grab this stuff. Almost like the young people who know how to work a cell phone, and they know how to all the apps work and stuff like that.
Right.
And so I was so impressed because they were just basically putting this stuff out. They weren't in anybody's camp. They weren't in MUFON's camp, or they weren't this sort of stuff. And they were putting this stuff. So that's why I said the young guns, and this is the future. Because one of the problems we've always had in the UFO community is there was a joke told at one conference. The woman came up and said to the conference guy, do you have a senior discount? And he said, if I had a senior discount, everybody would get in for a discount. So there was very few young people. So when these young guys came along, and they all work on Twitter, and they're all interacting with each other, so I would give one, and I would know instantly all the guys had the document. And so when these documents leaked out, they got a hold of it. And that's the kind of thing we need, is independence, where you get the material, you put it out, and you go as fast as you can to get this material and gather it and go in the cracks and figure out how all this stuff works, and not have the biases of having some sort of spin to it or whatever. So I really appreciated these guys, and I called them the sort of the young guns, the future of ufology, that they were able to get material. And you and I have know Danny Silva, and that was the thing. Right. Was he's gone from nothing to like 1 year where George Knapp's watching him, everybody's watching him, and that's what you need, is people who are able to get the material, move it into the field. And there's a lot of these guys who are doing incredibly important work in terms of educating people with just independent knowledge, just putting the knowledge out, not hiding it or using it for whatever purposes. Just get the material. And so that's what I look for, is I look for people. So I'll read their blogs, because I know these guys are on the leading edge, and it's like they'll come up with stuff, because usually there's not much that I see on the internet that I don't already know. And when I saw their stuff, especially this K. Randall May, I go, like, how do you figure that out? Yeah. They were getting stuff that I didn't know about, and I go, wow. So I started watching these guys, because they were picking up all this stuff, and nobody could really hide anything to these guys. They knew how to get in behind through the internet and figure this stuff out. So I really appreciate that we have new people that have come along, and you're one of the new people. But there are very few new people in the young people in the UFO community, and that's what you need in order to move this ball down the field, is a future generation. So, and anything I can do to help these guys to move it along, I'm willing to do it, because I'm getting old, and I've done my thing, and I realize you're going to have a new generation that will actually maybe crack the whole thing and open it up. And these guys are doing incredible work.
Yeah, it's amazing to see, and we're making new discoveries every day, and we need to work together to find out what's next. I like to think that we won't know if we don't go, and you've done just that. You've covered so many different facets of this to show how it's a thread that's tying all of these things together in an intricate way that most people in these fields haven't really recognized. So hopefully with these newer generations and people even beyond what we're seeing now can really make sense of it. So Grant, I want to thank you for your time today.
If you liked this video, be sure to check out our other content and get connected on our page and social media sites. Every day, new discoveries are being made all across the world and beyond, so let's work together to find out what's next. And remember, we won't know if we don't go. I'll see you in the Vortex.